Alright guys, I've been meaning to do this video here, so last video I showed you really the part selection that I made for my FRD version 3. I have some changes that I've made here. I'm not going to go over too many for the part changes, but I'm going to go more over setup in this video, and I'm just going to grab some tools here just to talk a little bit more about measurements and whatnot. So alright, so I got a camber gauge here and a right height gauge. Let me just talk about some of the basic setups before we go ahead and get into these guys over here. Main things are, I'm just going to try and look at everything here for setup. Gearing has been changed from the stock FRD final drive ratio for a couple reasons here. I did the math somewhere, but it's just about 7. Actually, I don't have the exact math here in front of me. One of the reasons is for the rear gears, which we have a little bit of difficulty seeing because everything is blacked out here. But these are the, I know I messed this up last time, but I want to say they are Spice gears, Spice rear drive gears. They're actually aluminum drive gears. They're actually for the front of a drift package, but for the FRD, since it uses the front input shaft, it goes in the rear. And that's a little bit confusing. The gears that actually go to the FRD, the front two are the stock ones. I believe it's a 30 and an 18. The rear ones have been changed here, and one is a Kazama gear. Let's see, I believe it is a 26 tooth on top. On the bottom, I have a square 30 tooth gear. So that is changing my final drive here quite a bit. I kind of wish I had dusted this off after running it because it is full of carpet, fur, and whatnot. Some small changes I made here since my last setup is for the front dampers. I finally put on the Kazama shock tops. I was a little hesitant. They're actually a great quality part. It's just they're not black, so sad face. It doesn't match with everything else. These guys are great. It gives you a little bit of added height to the front. Normally when I set up my cars, I do like to have the front a little bit higher than the rear, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And for the rear, we went with the stock black ones there, just regular plastic. So talking more about the setup, one of the things is that my setup here, this is particularly good for front motored chassis. So if you have R31FM, TT02 FRD, any version of FRD, FXX, any of those guys, I think the setup will work great on. You could go ahead and make modifications here and there, but that's what I would recommend this for. I have driven a regular drift package and drift package conversions. I definitely think we'd go for a different setup for that. And if you have any questions, feel free to message me. I'll see if I could walk through with someone's car a little bit more about that. So let's start talking about the basic tuning here. So I'm just going to start off with ride height. For my ride height, we have the front end sits pretty high at 7.5 millimeters, and in the rear a little bit lower at 7 millimeters. So this is something called reverse rake, where the front end of the chassis rests higher than the rear end. Part of the reason that I do this is when you're drifting, once you get to lock and you have a little bit of speed pushing down on the back, you'll see that the front of the chassis will kind of naturally squat a little bit down. So I find that that kind of helps balance out the height of the chassis and gives you a little bit of movement on the front end for a little bit better steering feeling to that. So big fan of that. I just want to go over some other little changes that I've made here that I found just help all around. One of the things here is I put a spacer over here. Let's see if we get a little bit of light on that. I have a spacer here on the arm so that our steering linkage, it throws in more of a straight line instead of being, used to be angled down. So that's helped a little bit there. We also did put on the version 3 wrap-up wipers up top. Or not wipers, but upper A-arms. The reason I like these more than the other ones is the other ones were actually a little bit shorter. I could pull them out here, but they're a little bit shorter than these in terms of, this is the only thing that happens when you have an all black chassis, everything just kind of blends in here. But essentially the arm itself is longer, so the turnbuckle you need to run can be shorter, and one of the biggest issues that you see with upper arms is them snapping when you hit something. Ideally you just don't hit stuff, and that makes things a lot easier, but it feels a little bit better to have something a little bit longer, a little bit stronger for that important joint on the chassis. So going from there, so we have our front and rear ride heights and our reverse rake angle there for our setup in the damper. So these are pretty much custom built dampers. So it's a RCR dress up kit. We have the Kazama adjustable top caps there. The internals are, we have some top line, pardon me, these are actually TRF 2-hole pistons for this. We have the Street Jam. These are the special coated. Let's see, we get it there. A little bit of accent of gold that we can see there. Shafts for those. And then for the rest of the internals, everything is part of a Kazama kit there. And I'll see if I can grab the part number for that. But they have a couple color options. The white one, I believe, is their softest rubber for that, and that's what I go ahead and use front and back for these. The oil that it is filled with, it is an 80 weight oil. I believe it's team associated, but any 80 weight oil will work there. In the rear, similar setup for the shafts. The pistons here, now these are top line 4-hole pistons that we have there. I actually wanted to get the 6-hole ones, but they were sold out. I would recommend those highly. RCR just put out a new 6-hole piston, which I'm sure will sell out very quickly, so I recommend picking those up while you can. I also went ahead and I tried to space the damper. So I have a little, this is a wrap-up spacer here that I have screwed in, a threaded spacer that is, and I use that in order to get the rear damper here as pretty much parallel as possible. Now, you can adjust how parallel it is. So if I have my damper standing up straight, what's going to happen is under acceleration, of course, the rear of the car is going to move a little bit depending on how soft or stiff your dampers are. By the way, these are 10 weight, 10 weight oil in the back, and I believe that might be team associated as well. So for that, pretty much the straighter it is, it's going to affect how the rear end squats for you. So if you want a little bit more squat, you can actually angle the dampers a little bit further back and it will give a little bit more. Or conversely, if you want a little less squat, you can angle them a little bit more forward and it won't squat as much under acceleration. So that will affect your traction depending on what tires that you're running. Now this I'm running on carpet, so your tire choice of course is going to vary depending on the surface that you're running on. If you're using polished concrete or tile or something like that. For these rear wheels, these are the top line HDPE compound. It's really good. I found that they're difficult to find as of now, so I'm not sure if everyone on carpet is really just loving those and buying them out, but I haven't been able to get a second set, but I'm happy I have that. Alternatively, for carpet, RC926 also makes an HDPE compound, which I find is really great. Also, Speedline CG1s work pretty well. Street Jam Hard, just anything around that compound, anything that's HDPE will work really well on carpet, or at least the carpet that we run over at Street Brake Circuit. For the front compound here, these are a Street Jam medium. I used to actually run the Speedline CG2 tires. I actually went ahead and made a change to those. Reason being, I wanted a little bit more front grip out of my chassis, so I did. Even though they have the, didn't neglect to mention my spring choices here. So this is a Speedline 32 millimeter hard progressive spring, and in the rear we have the Speedline 32 millimeter super soft progressive spring. And I said this in my last video, but they are the best springs that I have used. I've used a lot of springs, so I highly recommend them. Plus, it's really cool that you get the color option for it. So I like black, I get black springs. If you want gold, silver, blue, whatever you want, they have a color option there, and you can still get the correct spring hardness or softness to that. For the wheels and the wheel setup for this, the track width, my front track width is extended a little bit to make it drive a little bit better on the high-speed angles. Currently, if you look at my track width, it's just about the same all the way around in terms of the width of the chassis. And if I pull out a, let's see here, handy-dandy ruler, we just get an estimate here. I'm not going to be too scientific about it. My front track width is about, well, it's a little bit hard to tell here with the toe that I'm running out, but it's just about 100 and, well, it depends if you count it from the bottom of the track, but let's just say 195 millimeters wide in the front, and in the rear, a bit wider here, just 200 millimeters. Ideally, you would actually want your rear track a little bit shorter, in my experience, just because it makes the tail end of the chassis a little bit more responsive, as opposed to when it's wider, it kind of dulls the back of the chassis swinging back around for you. Let's go ahead and see what else we need to look at here. For my weight distribution, again, this is something that's going to vary. Even if you have a front motor chassis, you can put more weight on the rear. You could take weight on the rear by having a chassis that allows for the battery to be placed further up front, because technically you could move your servo mounts over here and just push everything up. But what I found is that I haven't actually gotten around to having some kind of setup station. I have a friend who's trying to get to borrow it so I can give you an actual weight distribution on here. A lot of people seem to aim for 50-50. I did go ahead and run the saddle packs back here in order to give a bit more rear weight, because what will happen is if you don't have enough, the tail end of the chassis will just snap around very quickly. It won't be very stable, and it makes for a very difficult experience drifting, really. And some people even go to the extreme of running the battery backpack if they really need that weight in the rear, just shifting everything back from there. But it'll also give you a little bit more rear traction, which can sometimes be a bad thing. So that's that, at least in terms of weight distribution. Now, another thing here, coming back to the damper setup, is on the rear, I actually used to run them quite far laid down. I find that it gives it a lot of grip, but the downside to that is although you get a lot of grip from that, the chassis itself really doesn't want to be as responsive in the rear. It has so much grip that it doesn't want to slide around at all. So I have stood them up quite a bit. It's almost as stood up as it can go, but just in one slot. And on the front, I have it as stood up as possible. Try to get it as straight as possible. It's a little bit angled in just a little bit, but overall has a great feel to that. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at camber and caster here. So camber angle is, of course, going to be how leaned in your tires are. Now, on the back, I know that I do run the 0 degrees of camber. I try to get the most grip that I can out of the rear wheels there. So, of course, some people like the hella flush style or whatever look you're going for your chassis, or just trying to get it to fit under the shell. In situations like that, you can definitely understand if you want to go ahead and run anything different, but I find that's the best to get the most contact patch out of your rear tires. Of course, if you're running constant grip tires, it doesn't really matter. I did, of course, ditch the constant grip tires in the front. I'll go ahead and explain a little bit about that as well. So in the front, I run, I believe it's about 5 degrees. It looks like I might be running a little bit more here. Just want to go ahead and make sure everything's angled properly. So yeah, about 5 degrees. Let's see if we get zoomed in there. Come on, there we go. Yeah, about 5 degrees of camber up front. The reason we want to run a little bit of camber is so that this way, when we go ahead and initiate the drift, we don't have a complete contact patch, and it makes it a little bit smoother in terms of how it will go to full lock. And then, of course, to complement that, we're going to want to run some caster. So this way, even though we're running that camber, we'll get a flat contact patch at full lock. So caster right now I'm running, and I actually backed it down. I used to run quite a bit. Let's see here. It is a little bit hard to do with one hand here. Alright, so just about 9 degrees of caster. Now, the thing about caster is it's good and it's bad. If you have too much of it, it's bad. If you have just enough, it's great. The idea that you want to run caster for is, as we were saying, our wheels, when they are straight, they do not have a flat contact patch on the ground. It's only just the inside that's touching. But what caster will go ahead and do, this also is going to have to do with kingpin inclination, which you will use on your knuckles. And for mine, I use the outermost hole in the bottom and the innermost one at the top. But what that will do in combination with your kingpin inclination is, if we look at the wheel, so this is wheel being straight, we only have a little contact patch on the inside, and as we angle that, I'll move it over here, we can see we actually have a flat contact patch over here. So what that does is it gives me a lot of stability in the drift, but it makes it a little bit easier for it to initiate since I don't have that full contact patch the whole time. One of the things you'll see if you run too much caster, you will get something called cross-jacking of your chassis. And even with a little bit, you might see that happen. So if you look at the chassis, so I'm just going to put this here so it is level with the ground. If you look at the chassis, when I turn the wheel, notice it's pretty much parallel with the ground, pretty much parallel. And then if I go the other way here, notice there's a little bit of lifting here. So if you run too much caster, the issue that you'll have is you'll just have too much lifting going on, too much cross-jacking. That can make your drifting just a little bit weird. It could also numb your steering very significantly and make your car unresponsive if you run too much. The reason mine probably does it to this side but not to this side is probably just a slight difference in the way that I have this set up here. My electronics are probably weighing down a little bit more on one side compared to the other. That could be indeed causing that issue. So that might be something that I need to get those scales for, just so I can see the exact cause of that. If we go ahead and we look into our Ackerman here, so Ackerman is going to be the difference in angle between the two of our wheels, the front wheels, of course, here. So one thing is for toe out, I run a little bit, not too much. You could barely see it, but it's just the slightest bit toed out. The reason we want just a little bit of toe out is to make it a little bit easier to initiate those drifts. With that in mind, you really don't want toe in. It's really going to make your car handle very poorly, and you really don't want too much toe out because that will just make your car very unstable in a straight line, and it might even turn in a little bit too quickly. So for the Ackerman, the way it should be is really 0 Ackerman. So the wheels should be both left and right parallel in terms of angle. Once it gets to full lock, it's okay if the inside wheel has a little bit more angle. And if we look here, it's really just 100% parallel. I spent a lot of time getting this correct here. So it's really parallel from left to right in terms of the lock that you have. Makes for really consistent driving. So I think that covers most of the setup here. Let's see, we have our caster, camber, Ackerman. We have the damper setup for that. Let's see here, we have the tire compounds, a little bit about track width, ride height, weight distribution, and gearing. So, I mean, with those things in mind, that's really where you're going to really, I find, have a great starting point. Now, you can always go ahead and make adjustments. So, if you want the rear to grip a little bit more, you could lay down the rear dampers. You could go to a softer rear compound. You can go ahead and play with the weight distribution for that. You can always go ahead and change front tire compound, damper oils as well. And all of that's going to have a dynamic change on your driving experience as well as the gearing for it. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm really missing here. Your shell actually does have a lot to do with the drifting experience here. So I actually have a couple here. We'll go ahead and grab one here. So we have, this is the C33 Laurel here from Yokomo. So one of the things that I do with my chassis, just to experiment a little bit here, is that for this guy here in particular, notice I have the little rear wing. Now a lot of people might say, oh, well, it's a rear wing, it's for show. But the thing is, even though it's not going to generate the same kind of downforce it might in a real car, you will still notice a little bit of difference by adding weight towards the rear of the car. A great way to do that instead of adding weights directly to your chassis is a couple things I've seen done is the little sticky weights. You can go ahead and just stick the sticky weights throughout your chassis to give it a little bit additional weight and change the handling characteristics. Or you can put a little wing, and I find that just doing that, especially the aluminum ones, has a very significant change for your driving experience. Now for my more pure tuning here, I got this guy. So this is also Yokomo. This is the Team Samurai FC3S, I think is what they call it. But for this guy, it's a pretty light chassis. It's not really excessively heavy on the front or the rear if you pick it up. So I find that this is a great basic tuning body here. So if you have something with giant wings, or if you have like I have one of the Rocket Bunny bodies where it's just a lot of additional weight, it actually makes it a little bit tougher to do your initial tuning. So I recommend just having a shell that is a little more basic, a little more equally weighted, just to go ahead and get a good standing point if you're tuning with the shell on that. If you have any other questions or anything like that, I know it's a little bit of a long video. I just want to try and cover everything that I could here. Please do leave a comment or send me a message. You can always catch me on the Facebook group, the Rear Wheel Drive. I believe it's RWD is the way it's listed, RC Society. And, post your questions, concerns there. You could always catch me there as well, and I'm happy to answer any questions when it comes to tuning FRDs or anything else. Also, I had a lot of fun tuning the R31s and the CTO2 FRD. So yeah, questions, concerns, send them my way. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you learned something new here. And keep drifting fun.